Today we have with us at Gastronomy and Beyond, Katherine Miller. She will discuss a few things on sustainability, social justice, and culinary policy. She's recognized by Fortune and Food and Wine as one of the most innovative women in food and beverage. She collaborates with foundations, nonprofits, and socially responsible companies to create and assess impactful social strategies. She previously served as a vice president of impact at the James Byrd Foundation and was the founding executive director of the Chef Action Network. As a first food policy fellow at American University's Sine Institute for Policy, Politics, and Distinguished Terker Fellow at George Washington University, she has shaped key discussions on food advocacy. She's an adjunct professor at the Culinary Institute of America. Her book at the table is a very, very special one, and I am so proud to introduce Katherine Miller with us at Gastronomy and Beyond. Welcome. We're really happy to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I'll just share my screen really quick. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. We're good for about 20 minutes of me talking at you, and then you guys can take some questions or things that come up. Awesome. And I was telling Adela that I am in the end of the term at the Culinary Institute of America, and I have all of these final projects to grade. So I'm just like, my head is sort of spinning with advocacy and opportunities and things. But I thought, given what you guys are thinking about, I would talk a little bit about the power of local food systems. This is a largely American-centric presentation, but many of the lessons apply related to policy and advocacy. And so we can talk about international applications or systemic applications as sort of at the end during the questions. And let's see if I can, there we go. So Adela introduced me. That's just a picture of me facilitating. This is the book. But I describe myself as an author, an advocate, and a campaigner. And campaigning takes has a very specific meaning within the work that I do. So campaigns being things that we're working towards a set goal, that we have a set of milestones that get us to, that are measurable, that are actionable, and that we're not talking about moments in time, sort of these activations, and we're not talking about movements, these larger societal things, but we're talking about sort of the engine of those things in my work around campaigns and advocacy. As she mentioned, these are some of the folks that I work with, have worked for, my professional affiliations, large-scale foundations, nonprofits, companies, and those pieces. And with most of them, I do program evaluation. So I'm really every day looking at this idea of what do we mean by advocacy. I've studied thousands of campaigns around the
We lost the connection, right?
I thought it was only
Adela?
me.
No.
It was her.
Yeah, it's yeah, we lost her connection. Yeah.
Oh, wow. The bad thing is that probably
from Anthony.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Katherine, we
did
lost.
I cut out?
Yeah.
Oh, where did I cut out? You would think that in the age of this world,
At the
it's just
beginning.
saying my internet's unstable.
When you start talking about the collaborations that you
Yeah.
have with the rest of the so very at the very beginning.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. You can almost start if you want. Like
No, it's fine. Adela gave the introduction, right? In terms of just, I think my main point about restating some of that was just that I have been looking at thousands of campaigns and advocacy efforts around the world. This is one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's from the late Anthony Bourdain, and that is a picture of he with former President Barack Obama. And it's one of my favorite because it's this idea that we think of often we think of food as something that's very it's very personal to us, or it's just on the plate, or it's just on the farm. But I believe that it is probably one of the most political things that exists. Food can be a weapon of war and control. Food is driven by many decisions that we don't truly acknowledge and internalize. And so this quote, "There's nothing more political than food," the reflection, maybe the most direct and obvious reflection of who we are, where we come from, what we love, who eats and who does not, that we are the direct reflection of those histories, and that these reflections often include some long and very painful histories that we got to them. And so I use this quote almost in every presentation I give, because it is the thing that drives my work in thinking about the politics of food. Food also for me is driven by the components of related to power. So food is freedom. It's the freedom from want and need and hunger. Food actually represents direct opportunity, financial security, the opportunity to grow your local communities. Food is central to our health. Too much of it can kill us in the same way that too little of it can kill us. Food is also about our communities, whether it's the communities we feed and serve, or whether it's simply the community we gather around the table. And so for that reason, I think of it as a fundamental agent for change. And so when we think about that, and when you can change things, you have the power, right? This is a diagram that is no secret to you all. You guys are at the heart of studying systems, right? But when we think about our global food system and our local food system, the same components are there. How we produce food, process food, distribute food, eat food, consume food, recover food. It's all a system. My work with chefs really centered on this idea of local food systems, and the chefs at the center of that, because they are very easily translators of each of those things. But this is a system that we're all very familiar with, and we're all trying to figure out every day how to operate within and how to change. Some of this is probably also pretty obvious to you, but I look at this, our food system, as being very critical but complicated. These are just a handful of statistics, right, about the food system, both here in the United States and then globally. In the US, food system jobs, everything from the farm worker to the waiter to the shipping and delivery person, it's about 22 million direct jobs in the United States, or 10% of all of the jobs here. It is the global food system represents somewhere around $8 trillion, 10% of the entire global economy, and we feed more than 5 billion people. But it's also a lot of problems, right? So there's child labor within that system, modern day slavery, low wages, no wages for the way food's produced. There's a huge extractive piece of that, but from a human environmental place. And so, the statistics sort of vary, but roughly around a third of greenhouse gas emissions around the production of food. We waste about $1 trillion in food each year. There are many sort of visualizations of that, but in the US, the amount of food that we waste is larger than our country, and we use the majority of our food resources, water, land, et cetera. About 25% of those, somewhere up to 40%, depending on the statistic, are actually wasted. And then we have about 25% or more of the global population is food insecure, and that peaks and spikes in times of great conflict. So when we think about famine, disease, war, the control of that number spikes. We saw it spike during COVID globally. So it's just a sign that, I think most people, certainly within an American context, are very used to being able to eat whatever they want, whenever they want it. And it's actually, all of that comes at a cost, at a very high cost. I worked on a report with the Rockefeller Foundation around the true cost of food. There's a true cost of food institute, right? And within the US context, what we found is that we spend about $1 trillion on our food from a national expenditure piece, but it's actually costing us about 3.2 when we add up all of the hidden and direct costs related to healthcare, related to national subsidies for agriculture, when we look at the cost to our biodiversity and our environment, and we look at some of the other pieces related to lost wages and related to injuries or other pieces, right? And so this is a system that we are keeping artificially, our food is artificially cheap, our system looks like it works, but it's failing us in many ways. And so we constantly are sort of looking for ways to change the system, but changing a system is hard. And we're seeing that now, especially within the American context, but it's hard to rip out the heart of an organ without a heart of a body without replacing it with anything. It's hard to rip, let's say, all the crops out of a field without a strategy to replace them. So when we think about food as the food system as something that's living and breathing, that's moving every day 24/7, just stopping it and ripping it out without a strategy to replace it is going to cause even greater harm. So it becomes this very complicated thing. I often think about if I threw you a piece of string and then you threw that to somebody else and you threw that to somebody else, that would go kind of smoothly, right? But then if I asked you to untangle that, it would be a mess, right? It'd be up and over each other. And so it's just, when we think about it, the systems thinking that's required is actually in some ways like three-dimensional chess to change this. So one of the places, and it seems rather parochial, is this idea of the local food system, right? We went from being hunters and gatherers and local sustenance providers and producers for much of the human lifespan. And then in the early 1900s to the 1950s, we started to industrialize our food system, everything from canning to the introduction of motorized plows to canning facilities, and to the globalization, the globalization of food. That delocalized our food and centralized food production. It's some of the reason that we can get things as cheaply and efficiently as we can is this industrial revolution and the food revolution. And this was really the way of thinking, right? Deliver the most calories to the largest number of people at the lowest cost in the fastest way possible. And this became a principle for the global food system, not just Americans. Now, certainly within the European context and other contexts, you see still localized communities that are centered around a farmer's market or a butcher shop or the local fishery. In the United States, that largely a lot of those industries have failed and been consolidated or moved offshore. So we went from having about 6 million farms in the early 1980s to somewhere about 1.5 million farms in the United States currently, due to consolidation, farm failure, also the lack of processing in those pieces. So when we think about how we feed people and how we guarantee national security and all those things, it's actually a return to that localized food system. It's how can communities feed themselves? So this is still the same food system, right? We're still looking at how we're growing food, how we're harvesting food, packing food, transporting it, retailing it, eating. It's the exact same steps in the system. We're just prioritizing certain things differently. And what we know in this world of local food systems is that it's better for everybody. It's better for the communities. It's better for the environment. It's better for farmers. When you buy local, about 40% or more people will pay more for ingredients if they're identified as local. So you might be spending more money, but maybe you're consolidating your overall food purchases. The economies grow because for every dollar we spend locally, we're generating about $3 in wages and taxes and other benefits. And the studies are early and new, but they are pointing to essentially this fact that if we can return to more local food purchasing, food purchased directly from farmers and producers, food that travels less, is not as ultra processed, we're actually looking at lower levels of diet-related diseases, one of the number one costs on healthcare systems worldwide today. So that is, some of the benefits of this. and just look at the state of Michigan really quickly. Michigan produces a variety of ingredients. You see them, they produce everything from maple syrup to herbs and vegetables to chicken to poultry, chicken to lamb. It's about $100 billion to the state economy in the state of Michigan. And Michigan in the last 5 years has actually lost about 500 or more of its farms. And 12% of the residents are food insecure. So they're producing all of this food, right? But the food actually has more value outside of the local economy, right? It's all the exports. So we're looking for ways to bring those products and increase that value locally is a big piece of this. And that is why, and this is a program that is actually under threat from this new administration. But in 2020, the federal government invested about $21 million in Michigan farms directly, supporting the economic development, the economic production of about 200 plus producers. Many of those were veterans, African American or BIPOC farmers, women farmers, new farmers. And it provided statewide coverage because what it did is it helped farmers find other markets locally for their food, right? So that's called the Local Food Purchase Assistant Cooperative Agreement Program. There was a sister program to this, the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement for schools. And so the idea was, how do we help Michigan farmers reclaim the value of their food locally and use that food locally within the state of Michigan and the region of the Midwest to benefit Michiganders, to help offset the food insecurity problem, and how to bring fresh and healthier produce back home. And this was an incredibly successful program. It's in all 50 states. And so it'll be one of the things that is talked about most directly in policy halls and in the United States moving forward. It's the same at so just sorry, I was going to talk about something else, but then I'll just skip to this really quickly because I'm a little bit over my time. But when we look at local food systems, and that reconfiguration of that system, we're really looking at 3 areas for potential action and 3 areas for big change within the system, and that is sourcing, the local economies, and policy. And so community stuff is things like emergency feeding, the world of food, the work of food, World Central Kitchen. If I could talk, and this is just a great quote by Jose Andres, that we don't think big, we think small first. Start with 10,000 meals and see what we can do tomorrow. When we're talking about treating the emergency response of food insecurity through disasters or other pieces. This is an example of within the networks that are available to us to tackle systemic change related to food. So this is the state of New York, but this state of North Carolina, excuse me, but this map exists in all 50 states and actually even exists globally. A project that's being worked on right now in Australia is taking this similar approach, right? Which is they're looking at community food councils in different regions. Those councils are bringing together farmers, producers, sellers, grocery advocates, others, and then they're figuring out what are the solutions in their local community, and then they're sharing that statewide. So that is very exciting work, and there are probably about 13,000 different food councils and our projects that are operational worldwide, and again, they're starting in India, Australia, across Europe, and then the United States, and then across South America too. So it's a very interesting model about how we tackle bringing these local solutions and giving them more visibility. And the big one is policy. This is eggs. Eggs are big talk right now. And it's interesting to know that at the moment that eggs are incredibly expensive in the United States, anywhere between $6 and $12 a dozen. And at the same time, we have huge global profits for egg companies. And so that is a real challenge that we're dealing with. And part of that is policy driven. Within the US context, there are about 17 different federal agencies that focus on eggs. So there are certain things, whether it's the marketing of eggs, see eggs for dinner isn't weird. That is a government funded campaign. That one's actually in Canada, but we have very similar ones here in the United States. But there are federal policies that regulate how the chickens are housed, how the eggs are collected, how the eggs are marketed, how the eggs are processed, how they're stored. So all of those aspects of it. So when we look at policy, we really have to tackle that. And in the US, there's no one office for that. So some of that work is done within the USDA, some of that's done within the FDA, some of that is done through HHS. So it's a complicated puzzle, but policy is something that we have to address if we're really thinking about systems change. Within the US context, it's actually something that Americans want us to do. So there's polling numbers out there that Americans believe that the food and beverage industry should be more active participant in this broader debate, right? That food companies need to be at the table, but also food actors. And this is just a series of maps. I call them the greatest drinking games ever created, right? This is the legislative process at the federal level, right? That's inputted by about 15,000 lobbyists. That's same at this is the same sort of complicated map at the state level. But the thing that I wanted to just say is that this is the metro government slide. It's equally as complicated at the international slide. So it's pretty telling that it went out this is the global UN stock take, looking at the food system at the global level and all the places for intervention. So it's the same, right? At the US context, at the local context, even at the international context. So the last one I'll just talk about very quickly is this idea of if we change menus, changing lives, and local purchasing and supports. And in the United States, one of the things that has taken great prominence and is spreading both nationally and is also looking at international applications is this idea of good food purchasing. So how do we use institutional dollars, money that is funded by governments, right? So DFAD, the US government, the Canadian government, whomever, and actually invest that back in the food system. So how do we take policy to force those dollars to be used in different ways, right? So instead of buying ultra processed, pre-prepared food from big companies, can we put them towards local producers? Can we create those economic pathways for local producers? And so the Good Food Purchasing Program is a national program here in the US. It's active in about 14 states. Legislation has passed, and we're already seeing huge inroads in this. So it was created by a woman named Paula Daniels, right? And we know that these are some of the benefits, right? You can move money towards higher wages for employees. You can move money towards making better purchasing decisions related to products that are environmentally sustainable, such as meat raised without antibiotics. That money can then generate benefit within the local economy. So it's a win-win situation, and it's systems level thinking, but it's really how do we repurpose institutional government dollars and make sure that the purchases of those dollars are being used for actually hit that sort of triple bottom line approach, right? So some of this has been spearheaded by groups like Wholesome Wave that works to pass legislation, also opening up new markets for farmers markets and farmers to take, in the US context, EBT and SNAP benefits, which are the benefits that low-income families use to buy groceries and meals. And there's also a rise in this piece towards using those dollars to create companies And in this case, Wholesome Crave is a company that provides catering services and other pieces, but is also a plant-based soup line that is now in grocery stores, right? So we're using government dollars to help with some corporate innovations, and those innovations are going back in to fund these sort of social benefit corporations. And so I'm very excited about these innovations, again, because it's sort of impossible to rip out the heart of a food system without things to replace it. And so looking at different ways where we can open markets, create economic opportunity, and use those public dollars for social benefit is exciting for me. And then we get all those things, right? I'm just gonna skip to the end, but we're really looking at
You're okay with time, no rush.
I know I'm nervous, but I wanna leave some time for questions. So hopefully there are some, and but it is a complicated system. We have to really think about that. My thing is this local food system and a return to things that maybe seem quaint or parochial, but actually make a difference, right? If we think all the way back to this idea that if for every dollar we spend locally with a farmer or a fisherman or a restaurant, we're helping generate 3+ times that in economic benefit. We can reduce our the negative health outcomes. We can promote greater environmental sustainability. And really everything in place. Mise en place is a culinary concept, but everything's in place for us to do this. We have cultural influencers. We have a demand from the citizens, right? From the voters, from the shoppers, from the others to do this work and to make these changes. And there are ways for all of us to get involved. You can get involved as a consumer. So as Marianne Nestle often says, vote with your fork, right? Vote with your grocery bag. You can do it directly within, finding out how candidates across the world are doing, working on these issues. And you can do it related to your corporate spending as well, right? What things. So there are ways to get involved in the change of the system. And so I'm at the moment trying to work towards a place of optimism with this, some of the new policy pushes in the United States. But I'm going to get there in part because of that power of local food systems, and that for the first time in a long time, we are actually having a conversation around food. But food is, as I also said at the beginning, very complicated. I mean, we're talking about wages, workforce, right? And so that means it's interconnected with issues like immigration and human rights, and workforce protections. And so we can't also lose sight of that. So hugely complicated, but in the same way that I begin every presentation with that quote from Anthony Bourdain, I often am reminded of this quote from James Beard, which is that if we really believe in food, we must do something about it, for our voices should be raised among the rest. And this, I just think that if you care about what you eat, and you care about how others live, those two things are completely interconnected, and we have a responsibility to do something about it. So that is where I will end.
Wow, that was so interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. I think we were just eager to listen to you. So interesting from all the perspectives. I'm sure we have some questions. I do. Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, I have thousands of questions. First, no. I was gonna start with a joke. Like I always love the name CIA. I mean, like
Oh yeah, it's the best, right?
yeah, exactly. So that's no, but I mean, congratulations for all the work and the research focus on local production. I think that's quite important, and I really love that we have the perspective from United States. I mean, like the group is an international group, the City Science, Gastronomy and Beyond. It has been a little bit also very international. I mean, we start with the Basque Country, and then no, and then we move internationally, but I like that we have the perspective of United States. I think this was a little bit missing. So thank you for bringing that perspective to the gastronomy and beyond. And I mean, I'm just curious about the work that you do. I think everything that you have said resonates with our vision, and is crazy how in the last years actually things has changed. No, like you were talking about how the number of farmers has decreased, how like diversity of food, and even if probably production of food has increased, but it's for like for selling out, but not for local consumption. So I think all that perspective is amazing. Is kind of and when you were saying, listen, it could be fantastic if we can change the system, but by changing the system, I mean, it's very challenging, no? Like to think in a more local production when all the like the machine is kind of globally set. So I think like from my perspective, my first question is because I think the CIA you also provide education as well, no? Like you provide training, and so how much of through the education are you able to impact into the system? So maybe the new, let's say, like the young generation looks into this in a different perspective. I don't know if you are including that in your programs.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, and I take the joke around the CIA because every time I tell somebody I'm a professor at the CIA, they're like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's the other CIA, right?" But it's telling that until about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the CIA only taught technical taste, technical approaches to food to students, right? As requirements, and add-ons or additions, optional courses were things like sustainability, right? 8 years ago or so, I visited the CIA offices, and this was before I became an adjunct there, and there was no active food waste education for the students. So imagine a place that's teaching people to brunoise or dice or take apart lobsters, and all of that stuff that wasn't being composted, all that stuff that wasn't being, and it was because that wasn't their mission, right? And so it was really the students who demanded education, demanded outside speakers, but that's relatively new. And the two courses that I teach are within brand new, only launched within the last 3 years, Masters of School Food Business and Masters of Food Sustainability. So this is something that, and I would say within the US context, we don't teach, I mean, this is a big movement that chefs and others are leading, but like we don't teach gardening in schools. We don't, home ec left American schools in the late 80s. So like most schools don't teach kids how to cook in school anymore, right? And so there's been a whole set of initiatives that have tried to put that back in, because there's this belief, one, of just like life skills, but two, like that's where you first learn about like maybe vegetables outside of your home, right? And the same within the school system within meals, right? I mean, it's crazy to me when I go and visit a school in France or Italy, right? The beautiful school lunches that many of these children have access to, and our own children here in the United States, we left scratch cooking at the back door also in the 1980s. So kids were eating things that are, prepackaged sandwiches, chips, a granola bar, right? And so the reintroduction of all that is just something that we're working on. So that's a long answer to your question, which is like, it doesn't, education around food is only now coming back, whether it's for kids and all the way to the CIA. It's a relatively new reimagination of those things. And it's only really taken hold in probably the last 7 or 8 years.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
No, no.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, yeah, Adela and I, we are coming from Spain, from food, let's say a strong food
Where
culture.
food's delicious.
Yeah. I was thinking that I've never in my life had a lunchbox with a granola bar. Never, no, never, ever. Jeez.
Imagine, I mean, the way I try and explain it to international audiences is imagine if what you got as your airline meal in economy was served to your children daily in their school.
Wow.
What would you do?
Yeah. No, but that's that's something that I have realized that at least, I mean, like in some cultures it's not only in some cultures food is super important and in others is less important. So or maybe it's important in a different way, let's say. So I don't know, like that's why I was asking about the cultural, like the cultural part of the thing and the educational part, because I think it's quite important. I think more and more often, like in America, in North America, is quite important. I mean, so I see the decline thing, but at least around maybe I just live in a bubble and I feel maybe very lucky. But in the group, everybody has like a strong food culture, even so it's a very interesting contrast. No, now we know that there are things like food deserts and in the United States you have some research on that is pretty good. You can identify it, but at the same time, so it's very interesting, like the tension that exists through food, because as you say, it's also a political issue. So yeah.
Yeah, but even as we think about food deserts or food apartheid, right, as the social justice movement in the United States would rather you describe it, right? Because it is actual political decisions that are made intentionally to separate people from the access to their own food, right? And so instead of creating laws by which you can grow food or have chickens or do the things in your neighborhood, right? We've actually created laws that say that's not possible, right? And so, 20 years ago, when a group of urban farmers, literally urban farmers, right, people with a block, a sidewalk, in Detroit, were trying to sell their food, there were laws against them selling it, right? Because it wasn't produced in the USDA prescribed formats, right? So even within the policy perspective in the US, we talk about, you'll hear this often, you'll talk specialty crops within the US context. A specialty crop is fruits and vegetables in the US context, right? It is less than 4% of the farm bill is spent on fruit and vegetable production for domestic consumption, right? There are other things, but that is a true policy decision. It is intentional. I mean, Representative Jim McGovern, who's from Massachusetts, he talks about this all the time, that hunger is a political construct, right? Because our policymakers are choosing not to end hunger; they're choosing to treat a disease of hunger, right? And some of those things were started really well intentionally. I mean, if you're a student of history, when we talk about the original food boxes of cheese and dairy and meat and other things that were given to immigrant families as they arrived in the United States, it really was to stave off hunger. But I know my German great grandparents didn't know what the heck to do with the box of food that they got, right? And so they traded it. But so food is incredibly political, and a lot of the things that we sort of take not for granted, but that we take as just the way the system works are intentional policy decisions.
That's just the way the system goes. I was thinking, this is a
And
very
Luis, I just loved your walk through your office.
yeah,
Like it was like
absolutely.
I felt like I was in a music video.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was using Ken's office and he just arrived and that's a little bit chaotic in my
It was
side.
awesome. It was like I was in a music video. It was so great.
That was really cool. Catherine, how did you are starting with food is political, yes?
Yeah.
So how did everything start for you? When did you start thinking about researching on, on this topic this way?
Yeah, it's a very nice question. So I'm a typical American, right? Like food was something that was I was lucky. I had a household that my grandparents were cooks. My dad was a cook. My mother can't cook to save her life, right? But so
Yeah.
my dad did all the cooking, those types of things. But I didn't think about where my food came from. And part of that was regional. Grew up in the South. I grew up on the coast. Like fresh fish wasn't an unexpected thing. Um, but we didn't have a home garden. My grandmother grew up with a victory garden. She didn't want one in her home. The gardens in her home were for flowers. They weren't for food because that reminded her of poverty, right? So I didn't grow up growing my own food. I didn't grow up, but I just didn't think about it. I was a very typical consumer. I didn't think about where it came from. It wasn't important for me to meet my farmer. And really, how I got into food was through the world of social justice. And I was working on a project related to democracy in Lebanon. And some people came to me and said, "Hey, we have this idea about training advocates, training chefs to be advocates." And I had spent decades trying to figure out how the best practices related to getting celebrities involved in causes and whether that was worth the time, right? And had really come to the belief that people in local communities were truly the people that can carry policy forward better than anybody, right? They are the people that you trust. They are the people that you'll listen to. They are your neighbors. Um, and I was standing on a mountaintop listening to some chefs talk about their local communities. And I was like, oh, wow, these are them, right? And they're in every single community around the world. Someone cooks food for someone else, whether it's a small roadside in Nigeria, whether it's a woman-run cooperative in Beirut, whether it is the guy who sells what I would consider an exotic meat just outside of the Great Wall. Like there's someone in every community who will tell you where your food comes from, why it matters, why it's important, that kind of thing. And so just these amazing storytellers. And that just led me down this deep rabbit hole. And then it became an intersection of we have people who people trust in every community around the planet. They are talking about something that resonates with everybody. Everybody has a food memory. You want to sit and have a glass of rosé and talk about my grandmother's fried chicken and being in that kitchen as a small child and what that meant to me. We can talk about that. And that is probably very common to somebody being in their Nona's kitchen or learning to make pierogies. Like food is a common cultural memory, and it's something that makes it very easy for us to talk to one another and compare notes on. And then take the political game and the world of three-dimensional chess, which I freaking love, and put them all together. And this has been the work of my life for the last 11 years, and I love it. Right. I also just call it my delicious accident because it was not intentional.
Luis, do you have any question?
I think Maitane, the
Yeah,
thing.
Maitane,
I think Jason has a question.
Jason, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, but wait,
Oh,
the cable.
I can go up to you.
Okay,
Yeah, please.
he's coming.
Yeah,
No
now
worries.
you have a full perspective of the lab.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, I have a couple questions, and I'm
Sure.
not sure which one's going to be most interesting in terms of the conversation here. But I'm just going to ask first off, that the slide you showed about like the Rockefeller Foundation from the Rockefeller Foundation with the true cost. I find it interesting that sort of to have the common language, like everything is converted to dollars, and especially when it comes to something like ecological. Environmental costs, biodiversity. Is there another unit like I don't?
That's not money. That's not so
grossly.
grossly capitalist.
Yes, yeah.
Um, you know, it's a great question. And unfortunately, food is driven by capitalism drives food and food drives capitalism, right? And so the shorthand for folks is the economic impact. So everything's in dollars, right? But you can start to look at the decline in diet-related diseases. So you can go from a world of high incidence of diabetes, heart failure. Like very interestingly, probably about a dozen years ago, I did a project in China, right? And China was studying the influx of diet-related diseases and the rise of them. And it was this idea that diet-related diseases were rising as affluence rose, right? Because these diets changed as soon as people got more money and the definition of what was affluent culture changed, right? And so, so it all comes back to money. But I think there are some different ways that you can talk about it in terms of, the preservation of family farms, the return to different lifestyles, certainly in the disease sector, right? Like we are looking at demonstrable declines in diabetes, in particular, through diet, right? If we just shift. And some of those shifts are driven by more access to local fruits and vegetables. So we're looking at plus-up programs, and again, the use of but unfortunately, in telling a lot of these stories, the thing that corporates respond to, the things that governments respond to, are when we talk about the effective and efficient use of money, right? So,
And it seems to me like you're proposing that there is, at least one way I could conceive of this is like there's some connection between food and place. So there's like community and the people that create community, plus also land.
Yep.
And I guess you'd also think about energy in terms of like, what do we get from the sun and natural resources, that sort of thing. And this becomes important to me when you think about the bigger picture of what we're trying to do right here in this building, which is to think about cities. Now cities have like an absolute shortage in land, but an abundance of community in terms of the people that create the cities. And this sort of leads me to my second question about, so are you in Hyde Park? Is that where you're based?
I go both Hyde Park and Greystone.
Okay. Because I'm very curious, like how the fact that the CIA is situated in the Hudson Valley and has like a very specific like food ecosystem around it, and sort of farm culture, what type of produce is available. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because if you then think about how do we scale this to New York City or Boston or other places where you're thinking about urban agriculture, like it's going to be different from the kind of agriculture that occurs in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, no, you just ended where I was going to start, right? Which is we have to reimagine in our own brains what this looks like, right? Because when I say agriculture, 7 out of 10 people are going to look, I think, a red farm with a silo and a field and grains, right? Or they're going to think about rows and rows of plants, right? And really what we're talking about, if honestly, to take it all the way to like an urban level, and you guys know this, right? Like, yeah, we're at a shortage of land, base land, but we're not in a shortage of land if we look at building tops, right? We're not, but that it requires a complete reimagination of what we think about when we think about food production, right? This idea that, you could put, and you see pilot projects about it. You see restaurants who have rooftop gardens that they use the produce to grow. Places like, Microsoft campus in Redmond, they're the way they do heat and carbon capture to provide CSA to the employees, right? They have a whole, because they provide fruits and vegetables to their own cafeteria for cost savings, but they had an abundance of it, so they actually provide a CSA to employees, right? So there's different ways to imagine what agriculture looks like, but that means changing the narrative in people's head about what they're thinking, about what they think is safe, what they think is natural, right? What they think. It's remarkable to me the number of sort of good food advocates who oppose aquaponics, who oppose pinpoint nutrition, who oppose all of these things that save resources, land. It's sort of mind-boggling to me, because it requires a change in narrative. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to utilize all of the available resources more effectively and efficiently, natural resources, physical resources. You can actually bring this. Detroit's a great example. If you go there and look at their sort of urban farming and the folks that everything from bicycle delivery, neighborhood to neighborhood, to what they constitute as growing. There's great examples of this in the city perspectives, but I think it requires changing the narrative. Poor CIA, because they are in Hudson Valley, they were not set up as a farm school. They were set up as a technical culinary school. It was close to New York. And the idea was we needed to provide more professional French brigade trained chefs to restaurants in New York, and we were going to establish that school here, right? It has never had the best of relationships in either location, Greystone or Hyde Park, with the local agricultural systems, right? It has a hotel, it has all those things. It's changed a lot of those things over time. I think with Michael Bacher at the head, there's a new director of partnerships. I'm really optimistic about the future of that. But let's not kid ourselves, right? Like, that's not why it was set up. It wasn't set up as a promotion of farm and agriculture. It was set up to deliver brigade method chefs to restaurants as the restaurant industry was growing in the United States, but also globally. And so for decades, that's what it did. It just got its first full-time Black culinary instructor 3.5 years ago. Let's not put so much weight on it that it's an improving, changing. It's a flawed but improving and changing institution, but it's not why it was set up.
Now, I know Maggie has a question for you. I just one very quick follow up. Do you see as part of your educational mission for the coming years to address urban agriculture and to the approach to urban food making?
I do. I mean, it's something that I teach in both of my classes at the CIA, is this look of sort of like reimagining what we look about urban agriculture. It just had this woman, Gail Taylor, come speak to my class. She farms on a 1/4 acre of leased land here in Washington, D.C., right? She's a BIPOC farmer. So I certainly do. I think it is, there's no way to get to hyper local food systems without reimagining what we believe agriculture to be. And that just requires a shift in narrative, and it requires a change in how we think. I mean, it's why I love the work of like Blue Watermelon Project in Phoenix, Arizona, which was created by a chef who does school garden development. And by garden, I mean literally that you can't see my desk, but the gardens in the schools are like the size of my desk, right? But they teach kids how to water plants, keep plants, take home food. But one of the biggest things that they had a challenge doing was like they couldn't, because of state law, the kids the first year couldn't take the food home, right? So they had to like get dispensation so the kids could take home the food they grew, right? So we have a lot of work to do, but like for me personally, it's in both of the classes that I teach.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay,
Maggie
Maggie.
by the way, our group back in 2013, we were also looking into urban farming, but with more like hydroponics, etc. So in some point we should share ideas. Maggie, sorry.
Yeah, I feel like you're answering my question a little bit in your conversation with Jason, but I'm just thinking that it's so hard to not feel so helpless and powerless when you look at food systems and you're an individual. And I know you said like, use your wallet to vote and all these kinds of things, but it was cool to hear you talking about this sort of community scale change that you've seen, like in Detroit or introducing it in schools. So I'd love to hear if there's any other communities where you've seen people come together that are frustrated with the food system, specifically maybe in this context of the United States, and make a change in some interesting way, whether it be, farming or policy or any of those additional stories.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan. It's an odd place to point out, but I'm a huge fan of Sacramento, California. Sacramento is the home of UC Davis. UC Davis hired a local chef to be their culinary director of the hospital system, a guy named Santana Diaz. If you guys haven't had him come and talk, you should. But Santana started using all of his institutional dollars to source locally from Sacramento producers, because Sacramento is one of those places where the majority of the food is exported to other countries. And exported to other states in the United States, but also to other countries. And so they had a somewhat of a fluctuating food insecurity rate of about 17% in the city, right? It is the literal food production hub of America, right? And so UC Davis Hospital hired Santana. Santana started buying locally. There have been another number of projects. There's a guy named Patrick Mulvaney. He's a chef at Mulvaney's B&L in the city. He started working with policymakers at the state level related to feeding people using California produce and foods, right? So making sure that if you're a Meals on Wheels program, a SNAP program, a school program, that you are prioritizing California goods before other goods. Now that may seem protectionist, or it may seem obvious depending how you want to think about it, right? Like, oh my God, like they weren't, but you could get cheaper avocados, you could get cheaper things from other places, right? And so potentially the dollar spend was greater, but that was Gavin Newsom actually signed that law, I think 2 years ago, to increase the level of California purchasing by California institutions. They have a great community. They're going to be the home of Terra Madre this year or next year, or one of the Terra Madre offshoots. So like Sacramento is amazing. They've been looking at it from a systems level, city level. They've been looking at it from an institutional level. They have some really cool thinkers there. So I'm a huge fan of I'm also a huge fan of North Carolina. Like Kaiser Permanente, the healthcare company, has a large headquarters there, and so they've done a lot of work on food as medicine. So yes, there's the Duke School of Research, but like a lot of stuff related to systems thinking, and predominantly within the food, that emerging world of food as medicine. So those are two states outside of Michigan. But yeah, it's hugely complicated, and sometimes I don't know what to do. I mean, every time I do a talk like this, my husband's like, our grocery bill just went up 30%, right? Because all the, oh shit, we went to Trader Joe, or we went here, or we went there. And it's like, oh, we're picking up, but we start our CSA again next week with Gail, the farmer that I mentioned, right? Like our butcher is a local butcher. Like, so it's all cyclical, and, humanity sort of sucks right now. So you got to find those pieces of optimism, but start small, take the first step, and there are things you can do. And I just look for inspiration in some of the great projects that are happening around the country. And as I said, Sacramento and North Carolina are two of my favorites at the moment.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And Boston too. Boston has a local food policy council and a food policy piece out of the mayor's office. Like, she's great on food related to the city. And Massachusetts has a statewide food policy, right? Like, it's one of the few. So like, even in your own backyard, right?
Yeah, cool. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for opening this amazing conversation. Thank you for ending up with optimism. I think we we need that. It's been such an honor.
Oh, my pleasure. If there are any questions or anything, if anybody has any follow-up, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm always open, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend a little hour talking about the power of food in our lives. So thank you.
More than welcome.
Thank you,
Thank
Catherine.
you, guys.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.